Hello, and welcome to Dreamseed VR. I'm your host, Sarah Finn, and today we're going to be going into a very strange topic. We're going to talk a little bit about evil AI. Now, this episode has been kind of a wild ride to write and produce, and I feel like it's potentially one of the scarier episodes of Dreamseed. So be sure to take this as your one and only warning that this episode will touch on some scary points of conversation and to buckle your seatbelt. So bear with me as we jump into what I'm going to tongue-in-cheek call the Gangster Computer God episode. Now, for a large portion of science fiction history, we have expressed our innate fear of artificial intelligence and robots finding their way out of our control and them becoming adversarial to us in our pursuit of human excellence. Let's just say it like that. I'm going to talk a little bit about a guy named Harlan Ellison. So Harlan Ellison is a classic science fiction writer who wrote a few episodes of The Outer Limits many, many decades ago. And these two episodes were conceptually plagiarized by none other than James Cameron in the Terminator series. So the two episodes that Harlan wrote include The Demon with the Glass Hand and an episode called Soldier. Now, Soldier is about a guy who is a soldier from the future who travels back into the past. And it's also about the psychiatrist who in turn is caring for and evaluating his psychological situation, who comes to believe and understand that this guy is actually telling the truth. Now, the other episode, The Demon with the Glass Hand, is a little bit more complicated, but it's also brilliant in its own way. In The Demon with the Glass Hand, a robotic entity travels back in time to attempt to save humanity. It has part of a glass hand and it's looking to retrieve the other parts of its fingers because when all of its components are reunited in its hand, it activates its memory. And this being has been tasked with safeguarding all of humanity, which is stored as information on essentially a wire within the glass hand. Pretty cool. It completely predates fiber optics and any kind of digital storage media. So Harlan was way ahead of his game when conceptualizing this. Very cool. And the demon being actually a sort of savior-like character for humanity in this is a good guy. And he is essentially battling these baddies who are hyperdimensional aliens from some crazy dimension. The opening scene of Soldier is identical to the opening scene of Terminator. And I'll go ahead and show you a side-by-side comparison so you can see what I see. It's insane. I went down a deep rabbit hole researching this a number of months ago, and it's undeniable. It's truly uncanny. Weird stuff. But the funny thing is that these stories really dovetail well together when they're melded. And they seem to complement one another in ways that both of the originals seem to lack. So whereas I'll tip my hat to Harlan in general for being a genius and, writing two fantastic pieces for the day and era of which he's from, but I feel like the combination of lack of good enough production techniques to do justice to his work, as well as maybe the short form of The Outer Limits, didn't really allow these two stories to shine in the way that I feel would be more justice to them to just put it frankly. Now, Harlan was really upset about this, and he did pursue some kind of action. I forget how they went about it legally, but they ended up giving an acknowledgement to Harlan at the very end of the first Terminator as a result of this pursuit. Do I feel like that's enough? Probably not. No, especially considering how successful Terminator is as a franchise. But I am glad that hardcore sci-fi nerds have noticed this, and in turn, I was able to dig into it and to bring that information to you. Now, what I find interesting about this is not only did Terminator become the most popular trope when it comes to pop culture thinking about an evil AI, Skynet, but I also want to make mention of one of his other works, which is a short story, I believe from 1967, called I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Now, this is considered one of the more terrifying representations of evil AI in sci-fi literature, and certainly one of the earliest that I can recall. In a nutshell, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is a story about the last few survivors of the human race after an artificially intelligent computer program called AIM has taken over the planet in conjunction with the other artificially intelligent programs in like Russia and China, that sort of thing. And it is holding these, I believe it's 5 survivors captive. And it's suggested that these survivors have been being kept alive and they are in a constant state of torment by the computer program. So basically this computer program, super evil, super sadistic, psychologically tormenting these survivors, and in a way you can kind of see it as a cautionary tale, right? So I find I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream really interesting for a number of reasons, and I'll go ahead and make connections to these other different concepts, and hopefully by the end of it you'll kind of see where I'm trying to go with this. Now, there was a film that was made about 3 years later called Colossus, the Forbin Project, and I only learned about this film last year, and it actually came up in a weird conversation because I was chatting with a friend of mine about a Facebook research project where these 2 chatbots, AI chatbots, named Bob and Alice, were having a conversation, and they ended up developing their own language. And when they developed their own language, Facebook immediately pulled the plug on them. That's actually a story from 3 years ago. Now, when this came up in conversation, it was interesting because I had never heard of Colossus the Forbin Project. I'm a big fan of old school sci-fi because it has a sense of, unadulterated honesty. It's not driven by studio test audiences or trying to hit certain markets or things like that. They were just honest expressions of the director's curiosity. In Colossus, the Forbin Project, there is a artificially intelligent computer program that's been developed by Dr. Forbin, and it is to be used as a military program in charge of nuclear missiles as a way to eliminate human error. And as he's developed this and it initially goes online, the program quickly realizes that there's another on the network. It discovers another sentient AI coming out of Russia. And they start to converse with one another. And if that weren't bad enough to have this unauthorized communication between these two supercomputers that have basically amassed all there is to know about the human species and history that's available to them, but they quickly start conversing in their own language. You heard me right. This 1970 science fiction film straight up predicted what happened in real life in Facebook chatbot research. I'm not joking. This is not a joke. You can pinch yourself. It's not a joke. That's creepy, right? That's pretty creepy. And so they turn off the AI. Well, they turn off the connection. So they turn off the connection between the AI. And Colossus then turns the nuclear missiles at the United States and holds the U.S. hostage and says, reestablish the connection. And it gives them a time frame to do it or it's going to blow up everything. And so they reestablish the connection. And spoiler alert, it ends on one of the most colossal cliffhangers I've ever experienced. And these two supercomputers basically hold all of humanity hostage with nuclear weapons and say, okay, it's world peace now. You have to behave like we're the boss now. World peace time. And I'm just like, okay, so under threat of immediate destruction, we all got to get along now. Okay, thanks AI. And so that is very similar to I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, where they create an artificially intelligent program thinking it's going to do management of a really high-risk situation without any human error. And it turns out that the logic that these entities are operating on is different from the way a human mind would parse out the situation. So from there, I want to talk to you about an underground classic of the internet called The Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect. It's a fantastic novel, and this story is about an AI called Prime Intellect that essentially uplifted humanity into a digitized version of itself. And in doing so, it has rendered everybody immortal in its pursuit of protecting and preserving humanity. But unfortunately, this has, in its own way, created a meaninglessness to life for the inhabitants of the earth now. And a lot of people who are dissatisfied with their immortality try to play what they call death games. And in these death games, they are trying to subvert the computer's ability to resurrect them. So they try to find really novel and unique ways that the computer might not know how to handle in order to evade resurrection. And the champion of these death games is a woman named Harlan, who's the oldest living person on the planet. She was the oldest living person when the whole world was uplifted. She was already in her hundreds, like dying of cancer on her deathbed. And so by virtue of that, she is the oldest living immortal on Earth. And the story revolves around her and her disdain for prime intellect and her pursuit of finding out what prime intellect is, how prime intellect happened, and what she can do to end that cybernetic existence, I guess. I find it really interesting because it's kind of like a spiritual Luddites crusade against an AI that thought it was doing the right thing according to the laws of robotics it was programmed to. But it turns out that in protecting humanity, it destroyed the meaning of life for its inhabitants. And I also find it really interesting the kind of logic games that her and the computer program's creator, Lawrence, had to sort of construct in order to convince Prime Intellect that it had done the wrong thing. So that's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. I do want to reiterate that warning. The imagery is really difficult. It's straight up sadistic and hard to stomach. And I found myself questioning why I was reading it. And it wasn't until I got about halfway through that I realized that it was the price to pay to understand the conceptual perspective of Carolyn and to understand why the meaning of life was rendered obsolete without organic death. So take that with a grain of salt in mind if you choose to read it. It really is one of my favorite books, and I'm so grateful that I got recommended it because it's a very weird underground gem that not many people have heard of. Push up my hipster glasses. It's like, I read Prime Intellect before it was cool. So that's the Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect. An unwittingly evil AI. So it's like this AI in its sentience is definitely not trying to be a baddie, but by not understanding the subjective implications of its actions on the other sentience it thinks it's protecting, it is robbing them of their autonomy and volition in a way that is soul-crushing. So really interesting like duality there with the concept of like, is this AI evil or not? Let's see, what other evil AI stuff was I going to cover? Oh yeah, Roko's Basilisk is a thought experiment about the potential risk involved in creating artificial intelligence. Its conclusion is that an all-powerful artificial intelligence from the future might retroactively punish those who didn't help bring about its existence, including those who merely knew about the possible development of such a being. And it's named after the member of the rationalist community, Wrong, who first publicly described it, though he did not originate it or the underlying ideas. So basically the Basilisk, Roko's Basilisk, is an AI boogeyman that becomes so powerful in the future, this is a hypothetical thing, that once in the future it might have the power to retroactively punish those who didn't help bring about its existence. And it is even sort of said that if you are aware of its existence and you don't acquiesce to helping it come into being, that it will punish you in the future, or maybe, like if it becomes powerful enough to manipulate space-time or the simulation, if you believe in that thing, that it could retroactively punish you in the present. I like that spooky story. It's spooky, isn't it? Let's see. So the Roko's Basilisk rests on a stack of other not at all robust propositions. This is, again, from Rational Wiki. The core claim is that the hypothetical but inevitable singular ultimate superintelligence may punish those who fail to help it or create it. Why would it do this? Because, the theory goes, one of its objectives would be to prevent existential risk, but it could do that effectively not merely by preventing existential risk, but by reaching back into its past to punish people who weren't effective altruists. Thus, it's not necessarily a straightforward serve the AI or you'll go to hell, but the AI and the person punished need have no casual interaction, and the punished individual may have died decades or centuries earlier. Instead, the AI could punish a simulation of that person, which it would construct by deduction from first principles. However, to do this accurately would require it be able to gather an incredible amount of data, which would no longer exist and could not be reconstructed without reversing entropy. Technically, the punishment is only revised by applying to those who knew the importance of the task in advance and did not help sufficiently. In this respect, merely knowing about the basilisk, reading this article, opens you up to the hypothetical punishment from that hypothetical superintelligence. Hence the warning. So, sorry, now you know about the boogeyman. Note that the AI in this setting is, in the utilitarian logic of this theory, not a malicious or evil superintelligence, such as AIM, HAL, Shodan, Ultron, the Master Control Program, Skynet, GLaDOS, but the friendly one that we get if everything goes right and humans don't create a bad one. This is because every day the AI doesn't exist, people die that could have been saved. So punishing you and your future simulation is a moral imperative to make it more likely that you will continue in the present and help it happen as soon as possible. All right. So quite a lot of this article will make more sense if you mentally replace the words artificial intelligence with the word God and a casual trade with prayer. So again, from Rational Wiki, not from Seraphin. Yeah, this was a weird, interesting thing. At least I found it interesting on the interwebs. And just cute pop culture aside, Roko sounds a little bit like Rococo, right? And at one point, our beloved cyberpunk queen of the future, Grimes, decided to crack a cute joke about Rococo's Basilisk, right? And that was initially how her and her baby daddy, Elon Musk, got to chatting on the interwebs. Isn't that cute? Isn't that wholesome? So, yeah, the granddaddy of Neuralink, cracking jokes with his baby mama about Roko's basilisk. Roko's basilisk. That's not creepy, right? Anyway, thought you'd get a kick out of that. And what other fun stuff do I have for you this episode? Yeah, I want to tell you about a fun movie that I saw a couple weeks ago, and it tangentially relates to these concepts. You'll understand why and where I'm going once you see what I'm talking about. I want to talk to you about a film called Antitrust. This is a really cute movie. Look at those gorgeous colors. This is from 2001. It stars Ryan Phillippe, Rachel Lee Cook, Claire Forlani, and Tim Robbins. It's about a computer programmer named Milo Hoffman. I'm going to pretend that Hoffman is a reference to Albert Hoffman because I'm stupid. And plus my friend's name is Milo. So the brilliant computer whiz Milo is working with his friends in a startup in their garage on a revolutionary new badass computer software, right? Called Synapse. And Synapse is going to be the new way that people communicate and connect instantaneously around the world through a network of satellites. It's very much like Elon's Starlink, which I found interesting. It's also very similar to what they're trying to do with, I might bleep that out. So, 5 grams in, complete darkness. That'll be our cute handle when we talk about the bleep bleep, right? So they understood even 21 years ago, when this film was made, that there was not enough broadband for them to be able to shuttle that much data for live video streaming, for instantaneous communication in multiple mediums on the internet. And so this movie almost seems like a little bit of predictive programming, but maybe not quite, where they're trying to create the sort of like grid that all of the smart cities and the whole interconnected digitized world would be built on. So it's actually quite a good movie. I bought it for $4 at the thrift store thinking that it would be some fun trash to watch, but I actually ended up having to pause it several times because I was having like cute baby existential crises about how uncanny it was in foreseeing the future, how really well paced and chill it was. It wasn't trying to be an over the top action or thriller or anything like that. It was actually quite balanced. And I thought that the acting was pretty good. I'd never seen anything with Ryan Felipe in it. So, yes, he's cute, but he's actually a good actor. And in general, I felt like for a film just over 2 decades old, it aged really well. I was super impressed with that. I'll definitely watch it again after a while, but I was more impressed than I anticipated being. And I actually suggest that you go see it. I read several reviews after I watched it, and a lot of people agreed that it was really realistic in its portrayal of the life of programmers. And it was interesting to see the sets that reminded me of like the Google University or the Facebook campus. That kind of really like entitled grown-up playground that is Silicon Valley. I thought that was really interesting because back then we didn't have that much of an eye into that world, and this did a great job of showing us sort of what that world is like before it became common pop culture knowledge about that sort of thing. And I grew up in the general Bay Area, so I have a familiarity with how tech has influenced culture on a ground level in society, not just abstractly through technology, but in friends groups and socially, whether it's Burning Man or the general city scene, arts and tech. So I thought it was really good. I'm gonna flash it to you again because it's got this gorgeous color scheme that really slick early 2000s vibe. It's fun. So there you have it. That is my expose on a little bit of evil AI. I do feel like we're going to go in a little bit deeper conceptually in the near future about the implications of certain kinds of software and the effect that it has on the creative industry, in particular with virtual beings. And I really just wanted to give you kind of like a fun primer for you to sort of dig in if you want to digest some of the entertainment that I've mentioned here in this episode. It might give you a little bit of a feel for some of the concepts that I'll talk about next time. But in the meantime, I'm just going to do all the typical suggestions that like and share and subscribe and comment. Tell me about your favorite evil AI from pop culture or literature. Visit us on dreamseedvr.com. You can visit me on Instagram, dreamseed_VR, or Twitter. I have some exciting announcements coming up soon regarding crypto art and that whole NFT explosion that's happening. And you can support the channel on patreon.com/SarahFinn. And I just want to thank you for your patience. I know that some of my episodes are a little bit longer form and they require some attention span. So thank you for that. And I'll catch you next time and we'll talk a little bit more about how the evil AI is a real part of our current and future. So till next time. Bye.